Can you hear me now? All right, well, good. We had good guitar audio. All right, sorry about that. I forgot to unmute this because if I have the amp playing and this distorts. That was me testing out the HX Stomp spring reverb with this 66 Tremolo, which is a good sounding amp without reverb. Later in the video, I'll show you some trem experiments I've been playing around with. But I'm not sure whether you can hear the guitar audio. Listen very closely here. I'm going to put the Stomp in analog bypass, and in the room, there's a very noticeable decrease in hiss. You tell me if you guys hear this with these mic levels. Does that come through? Can you guys hear that, or is it way too low in the background for this format? Okay, yeah, so you guys are hearing that. It's driving me nuts. That's about the same level as a Strymon. It's a little bit more in close comparison than a TC thing. And I can literally put this thing in DSP bypass. I can literally have nothing loaded in this and have the output at 0, so no guitar comes through. And that noise level stays the same. And everyone out there and their mother is using these things, the Helixes and the HX Stomps, and no one is reporting this problem. So I'm wondering if it's the supplied switching power supply it comes with, which is, you know, those freebie switching supplies with almost every digital pedal out there are uniformly garbage and very noisy. But it seems my best option to eliminate that is to buy the Seox or maybe one of the True Tone supplies. That's a $200, $250 supply to see if this $550 pedal will work while I'm still in the return window, which is frustrating. I hate digital noise because I spend all this time getting an amp to be as quiet as possible. That's 60% of what I do is just getting all the noise out. People think vintage amps are noisy. They should not be. They don't have to be. And so then I add a digital thing in front of it, and here comes the noise back. I mean, it could be worse. Could be a high noise floor on the amp and a digital noise. And I think a lot of players out there have noisy amps, so they don't even know that the digital stuff is noisy because the amp's noisier. It all masks itself. So maybe I'm just impossible to please, but some really nice players are out there using these things. You know, John, if you see this, John Cordy, if you see this, are you having any noise issues at all? Because it doesn't come through on your videos, and I think you would have reported on it. You know, it drives me nuts. Let me show you something more funner. Gonna plug straight in. Guitar into amp, noise gone. There's a little bit of a hum in the background because this amp needs a little bit of work. It just came in. This is the before. Let me mute the guitar mic, the vocal mic again. So yeah, I get a little spoiled. That amp just needs a good cleaning, but basically you'll see that amp. I did a video on it. It'll be up public Monday. It drives me nuts. Anyway, thanks for humoring me, and we'll explore that vibrato comparison between the actual tremolo vibrato in the amp and the model in here. Let me get to some of your guys' questions first. So it's a little less about me. Thanks, Toot McGee. I appreciate that. It's very kind of you. And JL's saying hello from Belgium. Hello. Morning Bone Setter. Sebastian, BC77's in Munich. Hope everybody's fine. Mark's here from Anchorage. Let's see. Hey, Chris McKinney. On the recent Champ, I went with the 470 ohm and 22 microfarad. Yeah, on the 636 cathode. Yeah, there's no real reason to change the resistor. If you change the resistor, if you increase it to an extent, you'll get more low end. On the Champ, it's moot because the output transformer will only pass so much low end, and that 22 microfarad still, that's not the bottleneck. The bottleneck at that point is the output transformer. Changing the resistor is something I've often done. In this case, the owner is using a brown box, and so with 114 volts feeding the amp, that 470 ohm sets the bias exactly where I want, which is about 13.5 watts idle dissipation on a single-ended cathode-biased 6v6. If the wall voltage were higher, if you're plugging straight into the wall, I would do a worst-case scenario. Most places in the area where he and I live, though he's farther east of me, he's over in Alabama, Florida area. 127 is not uncommon, so I would make sure that it did not nuke the tube at 127 and did not go ice cold if the wall voltage dropped down to 110, which it can at times. But yeah, I'm always mindful of that, and you'll often see me increase the cathode resistor in the Champ and other cathode biased amps to accommodate modern wall voltages. Let's see here. Thoughts on using a resistor, hey Matt, to induce sag in a solid-state rectifier. Real deal or hocus pocus? If so, do you put a dropping resistor after the B plus or a balanced pair off the PT secondaries? PT is power transformer. It's the real deal. It's a little bit overblown in forums because it doesn't make for an interesting conversation online to say, oh, it's a little bit better, or it's a little more this, or a little less that. Everyone wants to take sides and have big sweeping statements. So it transforms your playing. Everything is magical if you only listen to my advice. It's a real thing, but there are heat considerations. I prefer to do 2 smallish resistors on the secondaries of the HT tap, as you say, rather than 1 large resistor after the rectification, because if you do 1 large resistor after the rectification, you have massive heat issues. I don't do I very rarely do a Zener dropper to emulate anything that way. But you can do a big 10 to 20 watt resistor after the B plus, after rectification. In general, though, if you're going to go that route, you need to have a great big aluminum bodied chassis, mounted aluminum clad resistor versus 2, 5 to 10 watt resistors of a smaller value on each side of the HT. So like 82, 5 watts will typically be a nice starting point. Hello to everyone. Tinker Cave Dweller is hello from Vienna. I was just missing Vienna last night. My wife and I were there a little over a year ago in the spring, and it was just lovely. And we don't have any damn good bakeries or patisseries here, so I miss your lovely city. Hey, Jacob M. Yeah, he says, in my recent twin video, I removed the hum pot. That was the twin reverb reissue video. Can you explain that a bit more? How did I remove hum without the pot? Is removing the pot better than replacing with a higher wattage one? Well, it's very difficult to find a good high wattage, like you really want a 2 watt pot in the correct small value. You want 1 to 200 ohms, 100 to 200 ohms typically. That will mount to a chassis. As far as I know, that's unobtainium unless you were to order. If you're making an amp and you're going to say, I'm going to order 10,000 of a custom pot, someone out there will make that for you. But as for what you can buy off the shelf, which is what most of us are limited to, there's not really a good option out there. In my testing of the high watt, you find that video on the high watt video, Anyway, you'll find it in the high watt, 86 high watt video, where I did have a 1 watt pot installed temporarily to find where the balance needed to be, because the power transformer windings in that high watt were not well balanced themselves. So I needed to correct for the windings. But that was a temporary fix. I then replaced those pot values with the same ratio with half watt resistors. And that's what I did on the Twin. That hum balance pot is only a 3rd watt rated pot at best. And so you've got, when you replace with a pair of resistors, you are building 1 watt capability, half watt per side. In this case, you'd have, 1/6 of a watt per side in a 3rd watt pot. They burn up. They burn up very commonly, or the pot comes loose and has a bad chassis connection. So I just snipped it out and put a pair of 100 ohm half watt resistors. You can see that in that Twin video. It works, and it doesn't catch on fire. These are all good things. Hey, Mr. Anderson from Spain. Let's see. Now people tell me now I'm to where I had the mic off because I'm an idiot. Curtis Everett's been scrubbing a Strat fingerboard for days with varnish remover. That seems... Oh, man. I think you're going to have... You may be better off, Curtis, removing the frets and lightly sanding. I'm just afraid that by the time you get any solvents that would be effective against that much, if it's Krylon or something like that, that rosewood might be dried up and bad. Seox 7 is great. Yeah, it is great, but man, it's expensive. And you get what you pay for. I just hate having to buy that to see if this really is going to work for me. I've got a Pedal Power 2 Plus over there that I've used for 15 years. Of course, it won't power some of the newer stuff like this, and I've more than got my money from it. And if I get the Seox and this HX Stomp noise magically goes away, then I will sell that Pedal Power, and it comes out in the wash or something like that. Hey, Louis Shorin. What would be the change I could expect by increasing the idle current from 9.5 volts to 12 volts on a Tweaker 15 with two 6x6s? If the Tweaker 15 is cathode biased, then the tubes would be running better. With a cathode biased amps, you'd probably, but the thing is, 9.5 volts to 12 volts, that's not how I measure things. So let's just scratch the needle on the record there. Idle current is not 9.5 volts or 12 volts. You need to be measuring what the actual current is. And if it's a cathode biased amp, there are lots of formulas out there to show you how to do that. And if it's cathode biased, you'd want it to be about 12 to 14 watts idle dissipation. Go to robrobinette.com. robrobinette.com. He's got a bias calculator that'll help you there. But you can't... you mean watts. So you've measured it, and you know you have 9.5 watts in stock, and you want 12 watts at idle. Well, 12 watts idle is going to be a better place for cathode bias tubes to be. If it's fixed bias, that would be very bad. If it's fixed bias, you want on a 12 watt tube, you'd really want this to be closer to 6 to 7 watts dissipation. I don't recall if it's fixed bias or cathode. Cathode. Okay, good. Yeah. So the downside to increasing the output wattage the bias on the Tweaker 15 is the Tweaker 15's power transformer is already pretty stressed. It's more of a problem on the 40 than the 15, but the tubes would sound better. There'd be a little bit more draw, and the power transformer might be taxed. And I hate to say that because I like Bruce Egnater is a friend of mine. I really admire Bruce Egnater, but he sold the company. And so the Tweaker 15 and the 40 are his designs as built by a different company with different parts. If you have the newer power transformer, in theory, they've addressed those issues. So definitely try raising it so you get idle. 11.5 to 14 would be a good place to be due to peculiarities of cathode biasing that I can't get into right now. Let's see. People from New York City and DC. Serge is asking about Eminence and their SPL ratings. I have not done a comparison with a calibrated meter at a calibrated distance to see how accurate all those SPL ratings are between Celestions and Eminences. As long as the wattage is equivalent, you want to have the same impedance and similar wattage handling. If one speaker is a little bit louder, if you can use a mic and balance it out, try it and see if you like it. I think a lot of SPL ratings are a little bit fudged or at a certain frequency. Not all frequencies are meaningful for us as guitarists. That said, Eminences do tend to be very efficient speakers. I'm not criticizing Eminence. Hey, Mr. Owl. I don't have a favorite amp. For years, people thought of me as the Vox guy, and now people seem to say, he's also the Fender guy, and I'm getting an increasing number of old Marshalls. I don't think that I'm the Vox guy or the Fender guy or the Marshall guy. I am the guy who knows how to fix triodes and pentodes, and all those things. Use those things. I like each one of those brands for different reasons. All that said, for most players out there, with most budgets and most styles that they need to cover, unless they're doing a lot of heavy metal, I'd say go play a deluxe reverb reissue, or a real one if you can afford it, and go play an AC15 C1 X and see which one of those floats your boats. Those are pretty much the gold standard of what is made today to cover a wide range of sounds well. Now, there's all the people putting this kind of stuff in the amp, and there's all kinds of modeling stuff out there and channel switching and things that do everything. In general, a lot of great players gravitate towards a Vox or a Fender and then use pedals on top of that as necessary. And the better the amp is, the less they find themselves needing the pedals. T-Rock amps are great. They're very expensive, but you get what you pay for. Let's see. All right, Jim Cox is here now, so we can begin. All right, buddy with an H. Hey, built a 5E3 according to my grounding video. Beyond quiet. Nice. Pat myself on the back. And pat you on the back, too. Built a one-channel no-trim 6G3 with the same principles. Got hum in the first stage. Ground far side of cap quiet. Ground first stage at grid, no change. Any guess? One-channel no-trim 6G3. Yeah, okay, B flat hum. Okay. The first thing I would do is make sure that you do have the reservoir cap and HD secondary ground over by the power transformer, away from everything else. Beyond that, if you have hum in the first stage, first of all, make sure you don't have a bad preamp tube. Second of all, triple check all your wirings and your grounds. It should be, if you can build a 5E3, you can build a no trim 6G3. But beyond that, somebody emails me some pictures. Maybe I'll see something. But it's hard to get beyond that in this format. I don't have enough information. Hey, David James. When that needs to happen, I call the client and I say, any ceramics are replaced with Vishay 562R series. If there needs to be a replaced, say, blue Ajax or blue molded, I'll say we can see if we can find a used, new, old stock one that's in good shape. That's going to be the most expensive. If you care about the color, we can get some of the blue Synergies or the blue, what are they called? Sozos, which look right, and they sound fine. They're very expensive for what you get, but I think they're overpriced. But small production, supply and demand. Or 3, we can go with the thing which sounds the same, looks really great, is really reliable, looks beautiful. In fact, it's just yellow, not blue, but costs a lot less. I like the Vishay MKT 1813, but pretty much any good polyester film will sound correct in there. The Mallory 150Ms can be a little bit bright, tiny little bit. It's not anything to give up over. If I change from this Dandria medium heavy to this red Jazz 3, that's a much bigger sound than any capacitor change you're going to find in a coupling cap of the same value. Hey, yeah, you don't want to change one tube. You change tubes in pairs. If you have a bias, if you have a tube tester, you can sort out tubes from different manufacturers that do match together. But otherwise, you're just trying to get lucky, and you can end up damaging the amp or damaging an otherwise fine tube. And as tubes are $45 each these days, in some cases, much better to have everything matched. Contact John Sir, see if he has any particular recommendations for using the Bella. Jolly Bobby Goer, I always want to say Bobby Goer, Bobby Ogre. I want to get to it very soon so we can start the giveaway and the charity thing for that. I've just been so busy, but that's something I want to get done. Sebastian says, in my AC15 hand wire, the pilot light bulb goes off and bad. I thought of putting a little resistor in front to reduce the stress. I don't think a resistor would do any good for you. That's really odd that the bulb will be burning out. It's just 6.3 volts. There's an LED replacement bulb available that fits in the same socket and converts AC for use with the LED inside, and that's going to have a diode and possibly a small resistor inside it. That might be a good option for you. It should be a little more bulletproof than a bulb. You may just have a bad batch of light bulbs, which is not uncommon in the history of light bulbs. Paul Watson, well then, my job here is done. Thank you. Yeah, the Supersonic is just a garbage amp. I was complaining about the noise from digital pedals. Anyone who's got a Supersonic will never know if they have noisy pedals or not, because all they're going to hear all the time will be... What do I think about the Microchamp build by Rob? I have no idea what that is or who Rob is. Is that Rob Robinette? I don't call him Rob because I'm not 4. Sorry, I don't know. I've glanced at some of his suggested tweaks. He seems to be on the right path. I don't have any contention there, but I have not looked at them. If I wanted to build a chimp, I'd just build a chimp. If I wanted to build something based on a chimp, I would just build something based on a chimp. I'm really not trying to be a jerk. It's not conceit. You know, I watch Guitar World videos. You know, the guys who do pedals, the guys who do guitars, the guys who do gear reviews, the guys. Aside from the guys who do theory or what makes this song great, where Beato's got the stems and stuff, I'd say 90% of the stuff on guitar YouTube, I'm watching just to see how they present information, what their lighting looks like, what their editing's like, how they've grown their channels, how they do thumbnails and stuff. Just kind of keep an eye on things. I don't learn anything from most of these channels. I'm not going to call out any channels by name, but I don't learn anything from the pedal shows. That's not code for Dynamic. I don't learn anything from how to use a tuner. I don't learn anything from how to daisy chain things. Most of it is just useless. I mean, and the stuff that I need, the Tim Lurch stuff, I'm hopeless at. It's depressing. So I just go back and watch stuff I already know. It makes me feel better. But on that subject, I don't keep up with a lot of other build things like the Microchip. I know that forums get caught up in these things, but I just don't follow along. Sorry. Hey, Martin, do different makes of output valves really sound different? If so, why? Yes and no. On one level, these Sovtech 5881 WXTs in this 66 Tremolux sound a lot like most of the 6L6s on the market for the past 20, 30 years. I think that the small bottle tongue saws, when they are available and they are good, perform better in a combo because they're less susceptible to microphonics and they have a slightly different low-end response. Closer to the low-end response you'd find from an old RCA in the 60s. But there's another level to this, where a lot of brands today are becoming unreliable, like the 6V6S by JJ. Used to be a fantastic tube. For the last several years, it's become microphonic almost immediately when used in a combo. The Tube Amp Doctor 6V6 and 6L6 GC have had a lot of failures, which makes us all very sad. So if you buy a pair of 6L6s, that's about $90 in America right now. And so whether they sound better than or different than each other is almost unimportant right now. Right now is which one's probably going to be working a year from now or 2 years from now. And you can't say, oh, these. You can say these might have a better shot than these because these, we've had an awful lot of failures all of a sudden. So 20 years ago, I would have said, yeah, they can sound different and for all the various reasons, but we'd be choosing from variations of good working tubes. And now you're just trying to say, what's going to work? Hey, Farrington Caster, I have tried the WGS G12As in that twin. I will put them in the, I'll do a video with them, but that'll be when we do the big Fender Fest. Because that guy brought me, I think, a total of 8 amps, and all but 2 are done, and we're going to do a big playing demo of a bunch of Fenders from different output wattages and styles and sizes, and spreading pretty much from 60 through 68. I think that'll be a fun and interesting video. So you'll get to hear those G12As properly played by someone better than me. Like I said, when I do find time to sit down with Tim Lurch, it's nothing that he would feel proud of. Hey, OH, it doesn't matter at all what kind of cap it is, as long as the value is the value. All the rest of it's smoke and mirrors. The issue is that people will say, "Here's a 22 nanofarad. Here's a 22 nanofarad. Here's a 22 nanofarad. This one's paper and oil. This one's ceramic. This one's film, or whatever they're trying to tell you is worth spending money on." And here's what they sound like, and they don't measure them. So the old paper and oil that's supposed to be a 22 microfarad might be measuring 16 microfarad, might be measuring 6 microfarad, might be measuring 48 microfarad. Any blind test done in a tone circuit where the only variable is the capacitor and the only variable is the material where they've been measured to have the same capacitance, there's no difference in sound. Most of the magic in the tone circuit of an amp doesn't come from from the cap. It can be accentuated by the value of the pot, and the value of the capacitor matters, but most of it is how the resonant peak of the pickup is manipulated by that particular capacitance, and how much of a peak does that pickup have, and where is it frequency wise. And as you turn the pot and bring in more of that capacitor in parallel across the inductor, which is your pickup, does it get vocal? Does it get weird? Does it get warm? All these wonderful things. But I've got in this one, and most of my guitars, I've got 400 volt or 630 volt MKT 1813s because I stock an awful lot of them. And they're 400 and 630 volt because that's the value I use in amps. So that's what I have. If I were buying them to put in a guitar, I'd probably buy 63 volt or 100 volt. You only need 10 volt, 16 volt, and that's overkill by a factor of 10 to 16. But the lead diameter, the wire is thicker as the voltage increases, and I don't want it to be floppy, so I'd typically use 63 volts minimum. In my hollow body guitars, where I've got to fish the things through there, I use little Panasonic ECQ, which are like 40 cents each. They sound fantastic. Great sounding choice for Fenders. I've got a couple of deluxe reverb custom builds up on the channel where I use those capacitors for the amp. And again, I used the 630 volt in the guitar just because the lead, I had the cap and the lead diameter was nice. The rest of it is nonsense. Hey, Brendan. DSL 40CR's flat EQ settings. Well, there's not technically a true flat in any of the amps you're using because they're almost all designed to have a mid scoop. But noon is a good starting point on most amps. Sometimes you may want to have the treble approaching 1 o'clock. And on some amps, you may want to have the bass towards 11 o'clock, somewhere in that range. Somewhere between 11 and 1 o'clock on all the knobs should be a pretty good starting point. And I find one common factor with really great amps is it almost doesn't matter. As long as they're all kind of somewhere towards the middle, they sound great. I think I've got the bass on 5 on this, and I've got the treble on 6 on this 66 Tremolux, and it sounds great. Everything else is with the fingers and the pick and where you pick on the string and which pickups. Let's see. More people are joining us. That's nice. Well, I may reach out to Zach about borrowing or stealing a True Tone CS7. I need to look at what it offers versus the Seox. I had the True Tone CS12 here for a board I did for Hal, but I don't remember what all its options were. I mean, the main thing is I need to have about 1 amp for the HX for that board, and the rest of it I would need about 4 100 milliamp outs. That'd be overkill, but I'll look into the True Tone. The True Tone, I'll tell you now. I was like, why did I think I didn't want to do the True Tone? I remember the board I ordered for this to get a small board for my purpose is one of the what do you call it? I guess that new board coming. I just ordered it. What's it called? Anyway, it's the really small board. It's the same board that Keith Williams uses, and it doesn't have a lot of space beneath it, and the Seox fits. I'm not sure that the True Tone would. Someone will tell me what board I just ordered. I got the silver one. It's quite pretty. It's the Light Plus. The Mono Light Plus. Anyway, it only has so much space beneath. It's not like that, like you'd find on my old Pedal Power. And I think the True Tone was too tall, too big a unit. Let's see. Any ideas on making a Tweed Champ reissue sound more Vox-like? No, they're totally different. The mods on the 75 sounded good. I've heard mixed things on whether the Tweed reissue is really vintage spec or something totally different. The Tweed reissue is a poor implementation of the original spec, but it's not a good version of the Tweed. Look to companies like Allen Amps and Victoria if you want to get a Tweed reissue. But the Tweed reissue, the Tweed Champ doesn't sound Vox-like. The number one thing you can do for a Tweed Champ is either just crank it and put a cardioid mic real close to that little speaker, or play it into a real speaker so you can hear it sound good in the room. If you want a Vox, though, that is not the amp for you. JAD's Associates. No, I have had no Garnet amps come through. People keep asking. But no, I don't think I've even seen a Garnet in these parts. Hey Josh, how repairable is the Marshall JVM 410 head if I've run into one? I've got one, at least one on the channel, I believe. He's asking because he's owned one for 15 years and doesn't know what he's potentially waiting for repairs. It was overall okay. It's got these little metal studs on the back, on the inside of the chassis, behind the front panel, and all the little knobs and buttons on the front panel are on one long PCB board that snaps onto those studs, and those studs have kind of like a crosshatch in them that can so the metal itself can compress and let the board squeeze on, then expand back. And over time, at least on the ones I've had in, that doesn't compress back out, so the board's not held in place, and the board can come loose as you push a button. The board comes off. And the trick for that is to put the board back in place and then take a small flathead screwdriver and very, very, very carefully, slowly, and cautiously wedge it into the little cracks in the crosshatches and just nudge them open from side to side so they're all expanded. Just the slightest bit. If you do too much, it'll break and then you'll be screwed. It's not a it was not built for longevity. Other than that, the only issues I've had with that amp, had one bad power transformer, which is common to every Marshall of this era, and a bad screen grid resistor, I believe, that happens. Oh, Tom, no fun spending money on stuff that doesn't make noise. Yeah, I understand that, but once you get into running a business, you're going to realize, oh my God, this month I spent $300 on cardboard. Cardboard. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this that's not fun, but stuff that we need. Let's see. Hey guys, do me a favor. I put it in the description, and not many people read the description. Phyllis Stern has got the memo. If you put a few others, put question marks before questions for me. It makes it easier for me to find them. Like I almost miss AJ Matchness because hello from Blistering Phoenix. Thanks, I appreciate that. And then he gets to the question, and so it's easy for me not to skip the question. Not meaning to. I would just want to see it. But Sebastian here has got 3 question marks in front of it. It pops out on the screen. I can see that. Let's get back to AJ's question first, though. What do I like for a new production 6v6? I will let you know when I know. For a while, the tongue saws were great. Then with the embargo and everything, the tongue saws were unobtainium. And then for a while, the electro-harmonics were great, but I've just had 2 amps in a row with bad electro-harmonics EHs. And that was after several amps in a row with bad TAD 6v6s. So I don't have one that I can recommend. Only thing I can recommend is a dealer. So go to the tube store, go to Tube Depot, Eurotubes, make friends with whoever works there. You don't have to make friends with them in terms of, and then they'll hook you up better than anyone else. Just get to know them, be friendly. So if you have a problem, you can call them and say, hey, Bob, yeah, you sold me these tubes. I just want you to know I had problems about 3 weeks in. It started red plating, and they'll take, in most of these places will take care of you. They understand that they're having problems getting stuff in from their suppliers. And if you are nice about it and you call and say, hey, I bought these 3 weeks ago, one's already failed. This is the amp I'm running it in. I biased it to these specs, or my tech biased it, and it still failed. And no, there's not been any weird wall voltage. They'll probably take care of you, but then they'll have the information to say, all right, 3 weeks in, deluxe reverb, bias 60%. They can go back to their distributor and say, hey, we got a bum one, swap us out. So that they'll send you the tubes, they'll get the new tubes, everyone in the chain gets taken care of except for whoever at the factory is not doing QA. And that's as it should be. So if you're nice to people and have some kind of relationship with these people, they'll be nice back. And, this stuff is happening. It's happening to everyone in the supply chain. So, hey, Full of Stern, what are my initial thoughts on the new PRS DGT amp? All I know about it is I watched 5 Watt World's interview with him, and he played it, and he sounded just like himself, and it seems to be a well-built amp. I've had the DGT 30, the original 30-watt version. It was from a blues lawyer who wanted to sound like Clapton, and he thought he could buy it. He had a Murphy Lab R9, and he had this DGT 30, and didn't understand why it wasn't working, and I got the amp. He had a one bad preamp tube. I changed that out, and I went to his house, and my God, I hope he doesn't watch this. I haven't heard from him in years. But he said, it just don't sound right. And I'm like, well, what are you trying to make it sound like? And he said, I want it to sound like Clapton. And so I plugged into it. Not that I'm DGT or anything, and anyway, with his Les Paul into that DGT, it sounded like that record. And then I said, well, you show me what you're doing. Maybe you're doing something wrong. And no shit, this is what he played. So I just thought you guys would get a kick out of that. Anyway, I thought the DGT 30 was a great sounding amp. And it sounds even more great when DGT plays it. And I like the features that they included in it. Let's see. David James says, given a power transformer that can handle the draw of 5081s, could the Lux Reverb output transformer handle the tubes without burning out? You won't get much benefit using 5081s with the Lux Reverb output transformer will handle it. It's just kind of be clamping it down. They can't put out, that output transformer cannot put out the swing those tubes 5881s would be capable of. So you're still going to have a 22 watt amp, just the same way, a Vibrolux up until the output transformer is pretty much a 45 watt super reverb, but then all of a sudden it goes into a 28 watt Vibrolux output transformer. I would say if you want something reverb deluxe sized, louder, you'd probably either need to change out the power and output transformer and tubes, or just get an extension cab and double the surface area of the air you're moving from the speaker. You'll get almost the same volume increase with a lot less expense. Hey, Sebastian, you changed the master volume to a half watt switch is useless on those things. I assume you're talking about a Vox. What amp are you talking about? Did I miss something? I don't see, Sebastian, which amp you mean. Put that, tell me, and so I can answer your question. If you're watching right now, hopefully you're watching so you can put it in the stuff that I'll see right now. Which AC15? Is it hand-wired or C1 or hand-wired? Okay. Oh, yeah. All right. Well, the bias you want to keep the same. Here's the thing. That's what the half-watt mode of your hand-wired is just making it go from a very cold bias to a good bias. A good bias for AC15 or AC30 would be 100 to 120% idle dissipation, probably closer to 110, 115%. So between 12 and 14 watts is what you want the dissipation to be. And that's what the 30 watt, or in your case, the 15 watt switch does. What your 7 watt switch does is just give it a cold bias. There's really not any point to it. You can either hardwire it to always have the hot bias, the full 15 watts, and then you could repurpose that switch as a master mute, or just leave it alone and don't change it. Leave it in 15 watt mode because that 7 watt mode sounds bad on that amp. I don't see anyone laughing about my Sunshine of Your Love joke. It's not even, the sad thing is it's not even a joke. I'm not making it up. That's what that guy did. Anyway, let's see. Hey, Bulky. Pro Reverb with mismatched 4 to 8 is typically going to hold up just fine. Those Schumachers are really beefy. I bet it would sound good, but yeah, pros do have a 4-ohm because they're expecting it to have a 2x12. But I think it should be. I wouldn't borrow Treble. If it's working now, just keep it. It's going to be fine with that 8-ohm mismatch. You're just going to lose about 3 dB, so it might be nicer to be in the room with. It's a pretty loud amp. Hey, Kyle Lalo. He just got a Fender Pro Junior that he's loving. Do I have any advice for the longevity of the amp? There's not much you can do to give that amp longevity. My advice to you is twofold. First of all, if you keep it, be very, very gentle plugging and unplugging your guitar from it, and turn the knobs very slowly and carefully, because all the knobs and all the pots are plastic and they will break. And the input jack is plastic and will break. When you're not playing the amp, unplug the cable, because if you're walking through the living room and you trip on that cable, it will break the input jack. It is a very flimsily built amp. That's kind of an insult to you that Fender releases that at its price point, because that's about a $25 amp the way they build it. My stronger advice to you, and this is not to hurt your feelings, and it's not to make you feel like you've done wrong, because there's $1 million of marketing being spent to tell you you're right. Sell it to someone else while it still works, because it won't work for very long, and as soon as it stops working well, it'll cost more to fix than it's worth. And there are better amps out there. I'd rather you had a used Boss Katana than a new Fender Pro Junior, for your sake. And I know that won't get so much support on all the forums out there, but I don't drink any Kool-Aid myself. Let's see here. Hey, AC. Greetings from Portugal. Hola. I have not worked on a Marshall MA series as far as I know. I'm trying to remember what the MA series is. I don't recall. I'm sure it's something I have seen, if not known at some point. Hey, Guitar Journey. Does turning on and off the amp constantly at home have any effect on its life? What are we talking about? Are you just sitting there flipping the switch? You're going to get a letter from China. Cut it out. That's bad for it. Every switch, every mechanical component, a switch, a potentiometer, even a jack, is rated for X number of uses. So X number of insertions in its life, X number of switches, engagements. And so, yeah, they'll wear out, and there's no point. If you're going to be, I'm sitting here 30, 40 minutes in between making a noise with this thing. I'm not even putting in standby. It won't hurt a thing. But if I was going to go to lunch, I'd turn it off, just not to have the increased power drain. Use common sense. You don't have to turn it off if you're going to the kitchen for a cup of coffee. But if you're going to go to the grocery store, yeah, go ahead and turn it off. Hey, the Panda. Are there any gotchas or special considerations I should be wary of when doing a standby delete? I guess you mean removing a standby on a 50-watt amp using a solid-state rectifier. I would suggest... I don't have enough information. There are two reasons to use standby in an amplifier. Electronic reasons. Convenience to the owner as a mute switch is not an electronic reason. Either the unloaded B plus present. So when you first power the amp up before the output tubes warm up and draw current, is higher than the capacitors rated in the filter cap section. So say it's at 550 volts. If the tubes haven't warmed up and you've got 500 volt or 450 volt caps, you want to use standby for that. Or, and this is less commonly understood, if you have a cathode follower stage, which is the tone stack in a Marshall, it's the tone stack in a Vox, it's the tone stack in a 5F6A Bassman, or the 5E8 equivalent twin, for instance. If you have any tube like that with a cathode follower, where the plate of one tube is feeding the grid of another triode, at the moment that triode is powered on, it has high DC on its grid, but it has no path through its cathode yet, because the plate hasn't warmed up and the tube hasn't warmed up, and so it's just high voltage on its grid with nothing to do with it. It'll nuke that tube. You can have premature failure in a cathode follower stage, and so standby is good for that. So if your amp, and if you are sure that the filter caps in your amp are rated well above the voltage present When the amp is on with no output tubes drawing down the current, and you know that there is no cathode follower stage, and that could also be some effects loop stages in your amp, then you can remove the standby safely. Hello, Hillel. Thank you. Appreciate that. Treble control on a 65 Showman normal channel gets brighter turned down and darker when turned up. Ideas. Thank you. Are we sure that the wires haven't been reversed at some point? Because the Showman, I believe, would have a mids pot, so be easier to miswire the bass pot that way. If not, then you've got a serious problem either in the 250 picofarad treble cap on your board or the wiring from that cap to the pot might be grounding out somewhere. I would have to look at it. I'm sure it's pretty simple. Make sure the pot's not wired backwards, and then make sure that one side of it isn't bad. Because if you're turning it up and the whole thing gets dark, then you may have a short on that side. Thanks, Reed. I was watching one of Josh's videos this morning. You know, that's the earlier I said I watch guitar YouTube to see how other people run their channels and do things like this and communicate ideas more than I do to get information or to learn anything about the products or pedals or whatever. The plus side of that is I get to come to like how certain people do things. You know, and Josh is a great example of that. And the last live stream, I specifically said, if you're looking for information about pedals, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I specifically recommended David Barber and Brian Wampler as great resources, and specifically said, Josh at JHS is a little bit tricky because sometimes his sense of humor gets the better of him. I mean that as a compliment, and that sometimes he just can't help himself. He'll say something that at face value is just insane because it tickles him. And if you already know how pedals work, then you're tickled along with him. But at the same time, I'm watching some of the stuff he said on his videos. I'm thinking, someone's going to take this seriously, man. Anyway, that's it. The risks he runs, and it seems to be working for him. Eric Filsinger says no, no, no. So, I'm not sure what else to say, but yes, yes, yes. Oh my gosh, Tim Lurch, I was mentioning you earlier. Thank you very much. All the best from Tacoma. All the best from Memphis, Ted. Ted, sorry. Sorry, I also watch my buddy Ted, who does guitar, who has you share a beard. Tim, I was mentioning you earlier, Tim, as a great example of someone who really shows great information that my skull is too thick to let through on a timely basis. Anyway, thank you very much, Tim. I'll pop that up on the screen later. I'll probably frame that. Tim Lurch knows who I am. I've watched his videos for years. I'm saying this now because I assume he's gone. He's seriously talented MFer, even though I called him Ted. He and Ted Woodford kind of have a similar spot in my brain. Let's see. All right, talking about blue molded caps. Hey, Randy Steffs. I've talked about doing a comparison video on cap types and stuff like that. I have chosen not to because the setup to do it is really complicated. It takes a long time, and the people who aren't going to believe you still won't believe you no matter what you do. So what's the point of spending all that time? There is a company, A2 Guitars, I can't remember the guy's name. He's a real nice guy. He's a luthier and a guitar tech, and he has done videos showing that very subject. And it's just a true presentation of how the world works. And people are going to argue with him, so I'll let them argue with him, and he can get the views on his video. I have enough people telling me I'm an idiot because I don't like to use rubber bands and band-aids and paste in my Marshall repairs. So yeah, I've got my own unique ways of being an idiot already staked out. I'm gonna let other guys have their unique ways. Let's see. I think it's time to take the first break, and when we come back, we will get to Rob French's question about testing filter caps and stuff. So we will do a 7-minute intermission and then come back. So I'm sure you guys know the drill. Let's see. Coming back a little bit early because there's something I want to talk about. Let's see here. Typical. The one live stream, the first live stream in several months I've done where I've not had a Tele or 335 at hand. I grab the Strat and Tim Lurch shows up. I do watch your videos. Anyway, so I want to show the actual sound of the actual tremolo in this 66 Tremolux compared to the closest I've been able to get from two of the models in this HX Stomp, and it's not very close. Both of them are quite good and useful, but the tremolo itself kills them. There's something happening there that those models just don't take into account. Something is happening and you don't know what it is. Do you, Mr. Line 6? So yeah, I keep hitting the wrong button on the voice. Hopefully that came across. The two models in this Stomp sound good and they're useful. And as someone in the audience, they're like, yeah, that's a cool tremolo. Sounds like that Creedence song, whatever. But the real deal's got this phasey goodness, and this is just an opto trim. It's not it's not a harmonic trim or anything. It's just got it. So I'm glad that I don't have to go 100% digital like a lot of players are. Let's see here. Rob French asks, what would be my approach for testing filter caps, board-mounted radials without pulling the board, not having a schematic? Curious how I handle something like this. That's tough. First of all, I think what the problem is. Do I have hum? Do I have buzz? Do I have intermodulation distortion, as if stages are not being decoupled from each other? Second of all, is more common for a board-mounted radial cap to either have a broken solder joint or for the lead to break off the cap due to vibration than it is for the cap to fail. So I will carefully, because sometimes the metal ends of a cap, pardon me, in the amplifier can have voltage. I'll move them with a, you see the black plastic chopstick I use all the time, and see if the sound changes, and that tells me something. Oh, it's making contact now. Now it's not making contact. Sometimes you just got to do a Hail Mary and see. Other times you can say, well, I suspect it might be this cap here, but it's not measuring a short. This is an equivalent point to the same part of the circuit, and here's ground, so I'll alligator clamp in another capacitor in parallel with it from the point I can access to ground. Does the problem dissipate? Okay, it just wasn't filtering. Now it is. Sometimes it's best just to pull the board and say, hey, these caps are 30 years old. It's worth a shot. It's going to depend on the value of the amp and how much work it is to access. Hey AC, as far as I know, I have not worked on a Marshall MA series, but if you have a problem where the presence and resonance knobs aren't doing anything, it could either be a disconnected negative feedback wire or some other disconnect, even a broken resistor in the negative feedback circuit, because that's where those two controls were going to live. They're part of the negative feedback circuit, and so if you have a wire which has become disconnected, then you'll not have those presence and resonance knobs doing anything. Some circuits, I don't know about the MA, but some circuits like the 5150 run the negative feedback through an electrolytic capacitor before it gets to those circuits, and if that cap has failed, that's exactly the problem that you'll have. But it's going to be a problem somewhere in your negative feedback circuit. Hey, Rock and Rons, appreciate that. That's very kind of you. I can't really recommend a PV Mace anymore unless you're going for a very specific thing. It's a beast of an amp. I would not call it a vintage amp. It's just an amp which is old. Vintage does not mean old. Vintage means from a particularly good year, a particularly good batch. You know. So I think a PV Mace, unless you're just if you've always wanted to sound just like you're in the Charlie Daniels band in 1978, go for it. But I'm gonna skip ahead to Tim Lurch's question that just came in because I know he's not gonna be here the entire chat. I have a well, you're welcome to be, but typically some guys do drive-bys. He's got a question. He's got a Fender Deluxe Reverb Tone Master. Is there a mod can be done by someone like myself to increase the headroom? I don't think so, Tim, because that's all software, and they have. It's contentious because I've said, hey, it's not using as much wattage as it is capable of. And people say, well, it's got a 100-watt ICE module in it, and it does have a power section from an ICE module. Class D digital output board, which is capable of 100 watts. But the preamp circuitry in the Tone Master limits that. It's not getting anywhere close to that full 100 watt potential because they sell it with a 65 watt speaker. They would not be selling it with a 65 watt speaker if they were using the full 100 watts. And the Class D ICE module doesn't sound very good if you're running it close to 100 watts. You would probably need someone to do the memory in that Tone Master to get more headroom out of it. And I know exactly what you're talking about. When I tried the Tone Master Deluxe and I played it, it was really beautiful for cleans. Stuff like you might have just heard me doing with the Tremolo there, where you're not pushing the amp at all. But as soon as you dug in, it's like it had an old 70s compressor pedal stuck inside it and just slammed everything, and it gets quiet when you want it to get louder. I think if you're looking for a lightweight modeling solution, there are better options than the Tone Master series. I think it's beautiful if all someone does is play very clean, strummy rhythm stuff. But if you ever have an inclination to do some Hubert Sumlin or some Stevie Ray or some Albert King or Brad Paisley, it's just not there. It's just kind of clamped down on it, and you're hitting a nasty sounding ceiling. And it's a shame because the premise of the amp is great, but it is not a particularly good digital modeling amp, and I think a lot of that is because they limited themselves to staying within the cosmetics and the possibilities of the old 22-watt deluxe reverb as an idea of what the amp should be. So it's neither fish nor fowl. Let's see. Hey, Tom K1TL. You're changing caps in your Princeton reverb issue. Because the C28. I don't remember which cap in the reissue of C28 is. Is that bias or is that? I'd have to look at it. If you saw me do it, and I mentioned in the video that I did X value, use that value because I'm right. And that sounds conceited. I mean, whatever the justification was that I would have given in the video, or maybe I didn't mention it, you just picked up on it. If that's like the bias cap, and I went from 22 to 40, probably to 47, unless it might have been a radial. See, I don't remember what C28 is. If it's one of the main filter caps, going to 40 is an easy way to get a little more headroom out of the amp. A little more less ripple, a little more solid low end. But I don't remember what C28 is. I don't think of part numbers. I can't remember that from amp to amp. C28 could be a million different things in 100 different amps. I remember reservoir cap, screen cap, phase inverter cap, bias cap, things like that. So if you learn to look at circuits that way, you'll see the commonalities from amp to amp to amp, and you'll be able to understand what I'm doing in those videos better. It sounds like I just went to 40 microfarad on the probably on the reservoir cap just to get a little more fundamental and a little less hum. It might have been on the screen, in which case it would make the reverb quieter as well, because that's a place where ripple can get you in a Princeton. But I don't remember. Emilio, and to everyone, the only Morgans I've had experience with are the Princeton mockeries that I have on the channel. No one else has sent me a Morgan since. I don't have high hopes for them, but if Morgan wants to send me something and say, see, we do know how to build an amp, I'd be glad to feature it on the channel and admit that they've learned their lessons. I just think these are lessons best learned before someone sells something to the public. Hey, Chris there at 5 a.m. in Australia. Thanks for joining us there at the Guitar Amp Tech. Let's see. Looks like you're looking for 400 volt, 20 nanofarads, 0.02s for your super reverb there. You can use a 630 volt, 20 nanofarad. There's not going to be any real difference. It's just 400 volt doesn't handle as much voltage potentially. Don't beat yourself up if you can't find every value in a blue molded. Like I said earlier, the MKT 1813s cost a lot less, and they're still really pretty if you like yellow, and they sound almost exactly the same. Yeah, the 400 volt 20 nanofarads are used in the tone stack of the Super Reverb, and they're used as the output coupling caps of the AB165 Bassman. And that's one of the only times, that's one of the only places in a Fender where the Blue Ajax caps routinely leak, is the 400 volts on the phase inverter outputs of an AB165. Beyond that, the Blue Ajax, the Blue Moldeds, and what people lovingly call the brown dog turds just rarely leak DC. It's the previous yellow and red Astrons that leak like a sieve. Captain Fineweather, I will look for Frank and the Sender. Thanks, man. Sorry, I have not checked my email today. I've been swamped, and then I'm like at 12:45. Oh, I'm supposed to go live in 15 minutes. I need to brush my teeth, brush my tooth. Brush my hair. I missed some, actually. Oh, it's no problem, Hillel. It just helps me not miss questions. I'm not trying to be like, thou shalt, it just, people, especially by this point in the chat, people are talking to each other back and forth, and questions are easy to miss. If I see the question marks, it's easier. And I don't like seeing at Psionic Audio. It sounds like it makes me flinch. It's like when your mother uses your middle name. Let's see. Okay. All right, Shadow Broker. You got all right. So that 1K 1 watt is equivalent of a choke. If you're a 5 watt start smoking, it'd be rare for the GC34 to cause that. Typically, when I get that behavior in a Princeton, I know that something's wrong in the screen supply. The first two places I look are the output tubes. The output tubes can do that, or the reverb driver transformer can rarely do that. You would think that you'd have the same problem with the previous node as the subsequent node, which is downstream of that 1K, if you had a bad rectifier. But strange things can happen. I'm glad you seem to have fixed it. But in general, a 1 watt should not die in a Princeton. Thanks, Bottom Kitchen. I appreciate that. I want to get them available to everyone. Just trying to get control plates made. It'd be very nice if I had some investment capital. All these things are much easier if you have money, it turns out. Hello, Magisterium. Goodbye, Magisterium. Klaus is here from Denmark. Hello, Klaus. Thank you. Hey, Fred. Let's see. Hey, Seth Everhart. He's got a powered monitor that stops working occasionally, and then after it sits, it comes back on. Ooh, that's always fun. It could be... It really depends on how they built it. It could be a varistor, which is absorb moisture, or thermistor, where supposed to protect things that power on, but if it's not reaching its proper temperature due to reasons, they won't conduct past that. That'd be really easy for a good tech to sort out in front of them. I could sit here and conjecture about 100 different reasons, but none of that would really help. You really need to either take that to a tech or get something else. I'm sorry. If it's expensive, take it to a tech. If it works sometimes and doesn't work other times, and time is a factor, then that stuff can get traced down. It could be something just getting hot, but I can sit here and talk, or a good tech can have it on the bench and hit it with some freeze spray and alternate between freeze spray and a blow dryer and say, there it is. They may be using some chip to do a delayed power on, and the chip's just not working. Hey, Victor. No, they're not. Transformers and the Pro Junior junk. That's not worth spending any money on. Hey, Chris McKinney. Should I remove the 47 nanofarad cap hanging off the fuse holder on the 72 champ? Yeah, you should remove the fuse holder, and you should wire the champ power cable safely. I just showed that in that 75 champ video the other day on how to safely run an AC cable in a champ with the old switch, just adding one 3-terminal standoff. What's the benefit of running the 68K grids on the jack instead of the board? You don't get DC built up at the jack the way it builds up at that board. And all of a sudden a lot of mystery noises go away. I talked about that in the previous video on that 75, and you can see the result in the last video there. Sebastian, let's see. Sorry about, yeah, I can't do anything about the comment length limits in this thing. Don't go above 14 watts for an EL84. Or if you do, don't ask me. Ask the guys at Matchless, because they do that all the time. You know, but if you're asking me for advice, don't go over 14 watts for an EL84. Hey, Andy, appreciate that. 66 Super Reverb is a pesky hiss between V2 and V4. Clean the hell out of boards. New plate resistors, swap. All right, what you need to do is find out where the hiss is. So you got V2 and you got V4. If you mute the wiper of the reverb pot to ground, you know, connect the wiper of the reverb pot to ground, and you still have hiss, it's not in the reverb recovery stage. If you mute the input of the 3 meg resistor and the 10 picofarad capacitor that's coming off of V2B, if you mute that point, does the hiss go away? If so, is not anything in the reverb recovery stage there. If it doesn't go away, then it could be in the mixer stage. It could be in the wire in the board. If you mute the grid of V4B, does it go away? If so, you got a problem before that. If not, that's when it gets tricky. Typically, all that kind of stuff is caused by leaking DC on the eyelet shared by the 20 nanofarad and 500 picofarad cap off of V2B, where that wire goes over to the 3.3 meg resistor in parallel with the 10 picofarad cap. That's the section that most often is the cause of this, and it can be hard to get all the voltage out because that eyelet is like a quarter inch away from the supply to the plates for V2. But I'd have to have your amp in front of me to go beyond that. Sometimes, I assume you've changed tubes. Sometimes it's the wire going to the grid of V4B from the board. Sometimes that's the issue, and sometimes a shielded wire is necessary. Yeah, the Panda. Well, you got a 5F6A. You have a 5F6A with solid state rectification. With a tube rectifier, if you keep the tube rectifier in the amp, you don't need to use a standby at all. You can just hit the power switch. But if you switch over to solid state rectification, you want standby primarily for the cathode follower stage V2, not the filter caps. Hey, Jimmy. Yeah, I put a master volume on a Route 66, 3-4 months ago? Might have been longer than that, but it's up there. It's just an amp. There's nothing magical about it. It's a nice sounding little amp. Hey, Captain Grumpus. Yeah, it's safe to remove the tube cage and preamp tube shields from your Princeton reverb reissue. First of all, the tube cage around the 6v6s, toss that. That's garbage. The preamp tube shields, I would recommend keeping in place because we live in a very noisy electrical environment with our cell phones and our Wi-Fi, and those tube shields can be of real benefit. Now, you may take them off and say the amp sounds more open to you because it's going to have a little less capacitance there, slight bit. And if that's the case, great. File that away. Know that if you go to use the amp in the studio and that last 0.5% improvement can be heard by glorious microphones and captured for eternity. Take the preamp tube shields off and get the absolute best. But if you got a gig in a bar with a Coors Light neon sign above you on the stage, and everyone's got their phones and there's Wi-Fi, keep the tube shields on. It can keep out a lot of background staticky stuff that you don't even know is there until you hear it coming through your amp. But yeah, the tube cage around the power tubes is nonsense. Just makes it impossible to change a tube on a gig. Hey, the Panda, what is the benefit of an HT fuse? It can keep you from losing output tubes when you otherwise might, because there can be situations that by the time your mains fuse trips, you've already had damage someplace else. If you want to add HT fuse to your 5F6A Bassman, look exactly at what Marshall did on the JTM45, because the JTM45 is a 5F6A Bassman with about 4 different parts, some different transformers, some different tubes, and an added HT fuse. Hey, Toots McGee, I would always recommend people start with a good Champ kit. You can get one from Mojotone, you can get one from Tube Depot. I think even Stu Mac's got them now. I have not tried any of the various kits out there for reasons that become apparent when you think about it for a while. But I imagine that I know that the Tube Depot and Mojotone kits are going to be good. And I think the Stu Mac one is actually the Mojotone one. I think they have a partnership. But yeah, start with the Champ, because the Champ, you're going to have the highest amount of success. And if you fly through that thing and it was just easy peasy, then you know you're ready to try a 5E3 Deluxe or a Deluxe Reverb or something. If you struggle with that Champ and it doesn't work and you just get frustrated, you're less likely to kill yourself, less likely to catch things on fire, and you won't have sunk as much money and time into it. So it's a pretty good test for whether you're ready to try something bigger. And if you don't end up liking the Champ, as long as it's safe and sounds like it ought, you can give it to a friend. And, it won't be a wasted thing. Or you can just keep it around and make music with occasionally when you want something a little bit funky sounding, because they are cool. They're cool things to have. The Champ is not my favorite sounding Fender, but it's the easiest one to build for our first build. Hey, Sebastian. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the differences between various era Fenders. And Silverfaces are used way too broadly, because there's a huge difference between a 67, 68, 69 Silverface and a 78, 79 Silverface. The farther, the more you go ahead in time. So pretty much from 73 on, the quality drops. 72, they stopped using a screwed-in baffle. They started gluing and dadoing the baffle. And so when the baffle becomes damaged, it's harder to change out. On some models at the same time, they started using a frame for the grill cloth that velcroed to the baffle. Those things warp, don't look as nice. The silver panel itself doesn't last cosmetically as well as the older panel. It kind of gets weird scuffs and scrapes, and the finish kind of peels up. More importantly, in 73, they started using a heavy amount of wax, and starting in 70, they started using a lot more wire than previously. Very sloppily done. The workmanship inside went down. And all of a sudden the amp started to oscillate and have noise issues. So they started putting what are called snubber caps throughout the amp to keep that noise and oscillation down, which means that they sound darker. And because the wax, they get noisy, and you can see that on my channel. And a lot of the wire they used in the 70s actually corrodes and becomes nasty by this point. So while electronically the circuits are not that dissimilar from each other, as a matter of physical reality, there can be a lot more labor involved in putting a 76 twin back to fighting shape versus a 66 twin. But given the price disparity between say a 76 and a 66, it can be worth putting the money into the 76, especially since some of the larger ones, super reverbs, the twins, you can get a 76 super reverb for like $800-900 last time I looked on Reverb. Not always, but they're not as in demand, and you can put $400 worth of work into that thing and have an amp that for cleans by itself will kill, you know, here's the twin, here's this 78 restored super reverb, here's the 2-rock, which one's which. Going through the same cab, no one will be able to tell the difference. You know, and to buy an amp built as well as that today would start at $3,000 and go up. But back in the day, I think the hype about the black faces, nostalgia kicks in pretty quickly among musicians, and the 60s was cooler, perceived as cooler than the 70s. Pretty much by the mid-70s, people realized that something had passed. And I think it just comes down to polyester and bell-bottoms. If you weren't there in the 70s, you don't know what it was like between Sid and Marty Krofft. And, you know, I see people throwing 70s costume parties, and I went to one once. It was weird. Everyone there was dressed like they were at Club 54. I was wearing some Wrangler cutoff jeans and some tube socks and an old T-shirt with Speed Racer on it. That was my 70s. I even embedded a bunch of gravel in my knee just for the occasion. It's really hard to find kids in my size these days, though. I went really, really above and beyond. Yeah, to everyone here who doesn't know, Tim Lurch, he's a fantastic channel, fantastic guitar teacher, great musician. I don't get all starstruck very often, but I was like, Tim Lurch is here. That's awesome. Did I ride my big wheel in? No, man. I had a mean green machine. Let's see here. Good day from Vancouver, Fountainbird Q. Fountainbird. Yeah, Chris McKinney, Blackface Tremoluxes, and the very similar Bandmaster are kind of sleepers because they don't have reverb. Other than that, they're the thing. Chris R, the charity build will start soon. I've just got to get. It's really hard to get in touch with the right person consistently at the charity St. Jude. I'm not complaining about them, but I need to get some help to get the website part set up for that, so that when I do this thing and people can buy tickets or whatever the legal wording needs to be for the raffle, giveaway, whatever, I will never receive any monies. I will never receive any credit card information or everything. And an accredited, legit charity, St. Jude, that'll be through their website. All payments will be to them. All receipts will be to them. They will have the money. I will just be told, hey, here are the names and email addresses, and selected a winner. I don't need to. The money's not for me. The money's never going to be here for me to give to them. I'm just going to make this thing happen on my end, and then ship the amp to the winner and all that fun stuff. But I don't want to have any of their dimes here, and it's tricky to get the person who does their web fundraising to put me in touch with the right person, because they're doing big, charity golf tournaments, raising lots of money. Doop-a-doo. Randy, the only difference between a guitar amp and a harmonica amp is you want to dump the lows off on a harmonica amp, and if they're using a bullet mic, you may want to use one of the different gain inputs. The Little Walter, very popular, absolutely piece of shit amp out there for harmonic use. They're built horribly. They should literally be illegal to sell. They're so poorly built and they sound so bad. But their whole trick is they just put like a 10 nanofarad or 22 nanofarad cap to ground off the output of the second gain stage, something like that. And you just dump all the highs and upper mids, and that's the harmonica sound. I don't think that little Walter actually sounded like that in the room. I think people were trying to sound like what they thought he might have sounded like based on those old scratchy 45s. But let's see here. Hey, you've got a Top Hat Club Royale Mark II that has an audible low volume hum when first powered on. It doesn't go away. When warmed up, you can use the same hum a little louder. I don't recall if the Royale Mark II is cathode bias. If it's probably cathode bias, in which case you probably just have mismatched output tubes, Andy. Cathode bias tubes, if the output tubes aren't well matched, you're going to have that hum because there's a lot of ripple present in the typical output section on the on the output transformer center tap, and it usually gets canceled by what we call common mode cancellation, where each tube is pushing and pulling the same amount, so any noise present is common to each tube. They're 180 degrees out of phase, and so the noise gets canceled. But if one tube is only pushing so much and the other one's pulling a lot more, then that hum cancellation point gets moved away from zero, and you hear the hum. So I imagine you're probably just a new pair of output tubes, matched output tubes, away from silence. But I'll tell you what, Mr. Talamantes, when you come to pick up these amps that you dropped off, you can bring that Top Hat and we'll sort you out. Got some real nice amps of Andy's here right now, only one of which has made the channel so far. Let's see. Let's see, reading through to find questions. Profile Productions is rocking in Virginia. He's playing for people over 50, playing country music. Should he play a Strat or Tele clean? Should I attack my Dumble? I'm not sure what you're asking there. If you're playing country music, should you use a Strat or Tele? Well, it depends on what you play. I'm not sure that that's a question I need to. Should you take your Dumble? You should absolutely take your Dumble. You should take all your amps and at least 4 guitars to play a gig for people over 50, because we're very persnickety and our hearing is great. Let's see here. Hey, Pete Mancuso, Runt 50, just had the filter cap. All right, so you did the stuff you saw in that video. The only other suggestion I make for the Runt 50, and I didn't put in that video because I don't want people to start modding their Friedmans and such based on something they saw in a video that they may or may not understand. But this is, buried down in the second hour of a live stream. You're all subscribers. This is not our first time to speak. There's one other change I like to make on that. Friedman has got a 22 or 47 nanofarad output, a coupling cap on the output of his Fender channel, his clean channel. And that is going through the mix resistors into the 22 nanofarad input cap of his phase inverter. So he's got a Fender output value going to a Marshall input value. And as a result, because he's not, This is not a criticism of Dave or questioning the design, but the output coupling cap on that stage is a bit large considering what it goes to next and the impedance is present. If you change the output coupling cap on that channel of the clean channel from, I don't remember if it's 22 or 47 nanofarad to like I think 4.7 nanofarad is what I went with, then the low end response better matches what you would actually find on the channels of, say, this Tremolux here from 66. And so it just gives a little bit tighter lows. By tighter lows, I don't mean the lows go away. I mean they just don't get as flubby and overwhelming, which gives you much better musical control over the low end with the bass pot, because you can dial up the low end and get that real nice big sound, but it's not overwhelming. And it doesn't go. That's a very technical term. That's about the only thing I'd change on that. If I, I'll tell a lie. If I had that amp, there are things about the voicing of the Runt that aren't my favorite Marshall voicing, but we're talking subtle things. And I don't think they're Dave's favorite thing either, because that's not what he plays. He plays his 68 Plexi, and he's got his new one modeled on that. But within the Marshall wheelhouse, there are a lot of different flavors, and the Runt 50 sound is one of them. I would tweak it a little bit myself, but personally, I just roll my own. I have not worked on a St. George amp Serve Teach. I cannot tell you whether it's worth repairing or not. I'm sorry. Hey, Count Domingo, you can run an 8-ohm Princeton reverb issue into 16-ohm cab. The output transformer can handle that kind of mismatch, where you can go 8 to 16 or you can go 8 to 4. Either way, you're going to lose about 3 dB, but you're not going to hurt the amp. Ideally, you'd be going 8 to 8. And the amp will sound slightly different and be slightly quieter going 8 to 16, but it will not hurt anything. So if that's your option and you want a bigger cab, go for it. I don't think it'd be a problem. Do I sit down with players and tweak amps? I do from time to time. It tends to be at the very end and not a lot of stuff, because usually I'll have someone play for. If they're in town, I'll have them play for me. I'll get a sense for how they play and what styles of music they play, and I'll watch what they do, and then I'll make voicing decisions based on that. Then at the end, might have 3 switches for them to safely hit this. Yeah. You tell me which one's the closest to what you're going for. But a lot of guys will come in and I'll see what pick they're using, and there's the guys who very lightly pick back here. And there are guys who are digging in. Back by the bridge, real hard. Or they're jazz 3-ers. Or like Hal plays with his fingers. And so that tells me an awful lot right there. Like Joe Restivo, he came up playing jazz on big arch tops, and he plays a big pick. I think he's got the big purple Tortex, and he's back by the bridge, and he's playing real hard. And when I play his guitars with that pick and I play that hard, I sound like ass. He sounds great. He's got the knack for it. But I know I know the character of the signal that he's sending to the amp. And so, hey there, Hal. So there are things that I do when working on an amp that are hard to articulate, because I'm going from player to what physically is happening with the strings and the pickups to what the amp's going to do. And so I try to do a bunch of stuff that's really hard to articulate because the vocabulary doesn't exist for it. We're dancing about architecture on the best of days. Hey, Emmett, the difference between the EQ of your AC-15-1 and a deluxe reverb for pushing with overdrive pedals, I could come up with some graphs. I could get the Duncan tone stack generator pulled up for you. But in the end of the day, just play it and see what you think. AC-15's got a lot more mids than a deluxe reverb. Deluxe reverb's got a lot more mids than a twin reverb. A good pedal, overdrive pedal, will sound good with all three of those. It'll just sound different with all three of those. Yeah, Rob, St. Jude's, it's amazing what they do. And a totally different subject, I'm glad that you got to experience Gus's. Now, I know that Gus has got locations out in California and stuff now, but from what I've heard, they're not getting it right. You got to, here and, Memphis and towards the middle of Tennessee where they originated from, that's the real deal. And the farther from Tennessee you get, the less Gus's Fried Chicken is actually Gus's Fried Chicken. So I'm glad you got to have it downtown where it is very, very real and very, very amazing. Nice. Thanks, Guitars and Amps Rocks. Guitars and Amps do rock. Appreciate that. No name. I'm not sure of any PCB stuff that's endemic to having conductive goop. But in a lot of the Gibson amps and Ampeg amps from the 60s had this brown, gloopy stuff on it, and those things can become conductive and nasty, nasty, nasty. So whenever I get like a 62 Gibson or Ampeg, I'm always expecting, with the Gibson, I'm expecting to have to remove that brown gunk as much as possible because it becomes conductive. With Ampegs from that era, I expect that brown between the very small insulation on the wire they used and that brown gunk, I'm expecting to find burned wires, if not scorched areas of the board. Hey, Sebastian BC77. Yeah, the AB763 schematic covers a lot of amps. So, Super Reverb is an AB763, so is the Deluxe Reverb. The difference is not only in the cabinets and speakers, though. They use different transformers. They use different bias taps, 4 ohms, 8 ohms, 2 ohms. As a result, there's a resistor after the tail resistor in the phase inverter, which changes from 47 ohms to 100 ohms, depending on the model. The Super Reverb uses a 22 nanofarad cap on its mids circuit. All the other AB763s used a 47 nanofarad. Some of the models have mids pots, like both channels of the twin reverb have 10K audio mids pots. Only the tremolo channel, vibrato channel of the Super Reverb does. The normal channel does not. The Showman seem to bounce around a little bit, I think. They all share the same. All those models share the same tremolo. Some of them do. Some of them do not have reverb. If they have reverb, the reverb's all the same. So really, the only outliers are the Champ, the Princeton, and the various Bassman models, and up to about 68, 69. But cabinets and speakers are a huge difference too. Anyway, it is time for a second intermission because I'm out of coffee and this will not stand. So, see you guys in 7 minutes. All right, ending the intermission a little bit early again. Seasons of changing, so I've switched to iced coffee. For the record, I've had this Stanley Cup for about 5 years now, long before they became trendy, and the trendy ones are like twice as big. That's ridiculous. Some other stuff I'm trying, or hopeful to try, and the reason I'm spending so much time exploring this HX Stomp, and I know it seems strange given the focus of the channel, is not just to have effects for use with amps occasionally, but if I can get rid of the noise issue. One of the things this would allow me to do is anytime a player comes over and plays into an amp, I can also do the USB out to the computer as an interface. I've got it hooked up already to the computer, and I can record the direct through this, and then I can play that back. I can reamp through this into any other amplifier at any other time with the player's permission. So if a really great player comes over and plays something great into, say, a 66 Tremolux, and then we wanted to hear what that would sound like through an AC30, what that same part would sound like through 50 watt, JTM 45, I just play it back through this, and that I don't have to buy a reamp box and a DI and all that setup. I would have that set up. That's one of the reasons I was looking into this rather than the HX effects or other options, because this could solve a lot of problems and give me a lot of opportunities. One of the issues is that the analog bypass is quiet, but if I play guitar through it versus playing straight into the amp, there's definitely a loss of highs because there's a splitter in here, even when it's analog bypassed. I've read that a buffer fixes that, so I have ordered a new Polytune 3 with a buffer, and I'm going to try that. And if I don't like the buffer, then it will go away, because I have a Polytune 2, which is great as far as tuning. Better than the tuner in the Stomp, certainly, both because it's instant on, and which is great for muting, and it's more accurate. And yes, I've tried the strobe mode in the HX. The Polytune strobe is much more accurate, as is the newer one, and the new Peterson. The Peterson's much larger, and I'm trying to keep the board size down. Anyway, so there's a lot behind my thoughts on this, and if I can just get this noise issue settled, I may need to borrow a different power supply. Tim Lurch asks, hey, is there a Princeton-sized amp with 35 to 40 watts that still sounds Fendery so you can have more clean headroom without humping his Vibrolux reverb, etc.? You might want to look into some of the Milkman amps, which are doing a combination of tube and solid state and Class D stuff that's very lightweight. I'm not sure if it's going to be any better as far as weight and size than the Vibrolux reverb, but the Sir Bella would be a good choice for a lot of players out there. I believe it's fairly lightweight for what it is, and it has the sound, and it's right there in that wattage that you're looking for, and it's not much bigger than a Princeton. But like Michael Davis is suggesting the Headstrong Little King, that's just a Princeton, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good build of a Princeton. But as far as a 40 watts small Fendery thing that's not huge, it's tricky. Milkman might be a good option for you. I've not tried them. I've heard good things about them. The Headstrong stuff is kind of way the same as the Fenders that Tim already has. Possibly the Sir Bella might do something good for him. The other option is to get a Fender circuit that you like put in a head format, and then have a separate cab, maybe even try some of the Neo speakers, which are very lightweight. The only one of which I've liked a little bit has been the Neo Creamback, but it's still quite bright. It's not much higher output, Michael. I'm not arguing. It's just not that much more. More on paper is not always more in person. Or just get a Princeton and have a 2x12 or a very efficient 1x12 to run into as well. And then you'd have, every time you double the surface area of the speakers, you get a big increase in volume on stage. I'm sure Tim knows this, but it's tough. Everyone wants a 1x12 40-watt amp that sounds like their favorite Fender, that weighs nothing. And as far as I know, that still doesn't quite exist. I have not looked into Rob's resistor load attenuators, Bambule. Resistor load attenuators can work. It's tricky because there's heat, and it doesn't always deal with heat very well. Within certain confines, it can work, but you have to say, I only need to come down this amount. There's a reason that a lot of us have done MOSFET attenuation, because the MOSFET is better at efficiently dispersing heat than a resistor is. So you can have a small change in a resistor in a pot, which is interpreted by a transistor as a large change in current, which then controls a MOSFET, which does that fairly efficiently in a way that is designed to disperse the heat from it. So a pure resistance mode attenuator has got problems. And there's also the issue that if you're using it as a dummy load, I have a pure resistive dummy load you saw in the scoped video a couple of weeks back. That doesn't behave like a speaker. That's for me watching a 1K sine wave or 400 hertz sine wave or whatever into. But if you play into it, the amp doesn't feel right. It doesn't sound right. The amp isn't behaving properly. That's why we have reactive loads out there. And reactive loads cannot just be done purely resistively either. Let's see, I missed something from Bottom Kitchen. Saw a homemade hand-wired JMI AC10 twin with EFA reverb made from a Cambridge 30 cab, $375, too good to be true. Yes, that is almost free lunch. For me to build that amp for you and to make no money on it is $1,800. Tell you right now, to build that amp correctly and make not a dime on it, $1,800. So $375. Let's see. Super sticker from Curtis Everett. Thank you. I love how the program I use, and Keith Williams was asking me about this, is something called Ecamm, which is a lot better than many of the other streaming services, but packages, but it's only available for the Mac. But it doesn't import everything from YouTube. So here, instead of seeing the sticker, I get Pear character doing a shake sign with his hand saying cool. So cool, Pear. Or is it more of a ZZ Top? Andy, you got one of the old Tone King, Sky Kings. I'd be glad to review it. Yeah, I've certainly reviewed the fuck out of the modern PC version, much to everyone's chagrin. But yeah, those tower boards are kind of fascinating. They do really. Mark does really good work. Mark Bartel is the guy who used to do Tone King, and now he does his own Bartel amps. Beautiful stuff. I'd love to take a look at that. No Name says PCB mounted tube sockets should be outlawed. Not really. Depends on what the tubes are. There are certain tubes where it's much better to use chassis mounted, and that's my preference. And especially if there's any substantial voltage and current present. But even up to EL84s, a good PCB socket mounted properly with proper lead dress on the board and proper mechanical support to the chassis can be fine. The stuff in the AC-15 and AC-30 custom series is really well done, and there would be no benefit to chassis mounting them. But you do a Hot Rod DeVille or Blues Deluxe or something, that's the wrong way to do it. You do a Blues Junior, that's the absolute back-assward way to do it. Trouble is people do something the cheapest, dumbest way possible, and then it becomes really popular, and that becomes representative of the entire notion to people. Imagine if Henry Ford had designed the Model T, at the same time a competitor designed a similar mass production car that for whatever reason became really popular and sold, and everyone bought the other car that's mass produced, and it all started to fall apart in five months. And people would say, "Oh, mass production's bad." No, it's because someone undercut Henry Ford. Not that I'm holding Henry Ford up as some exemplar of anything, a Nazi bastard, but Nazi bastard with clever ideas when it comes to production. Let's see, he loves Tortex picks so much he can marry them. And Clayton picks, I've done my share of Clayton picks. Andy, 1966, I'm sorry your internet crashed. Andy T's got a whole bunch of Bartels, a whole bunch of Tunkings. I've played the Sky King and the Imperial. I've not played the Metropolitan. Sebastian, you're not boring me. I just don't know what the SL22 fuse is. I believe they've got the 5-volt taps for the rectifier fused in that, and they've got the HT fuse on the the power transformer HT center tap, and they've got the mains fuse, and they have heater fuses. But I don't know what SL22 is, because remember, I can't remember all these part numbers for different amps. I remember the function of the component in an amplifier. Sorry, I'm not criticizing you. It's just Josh Roberts is wearing out a Jazz 3. I keep coming back to the Jazz 3 and different. This one's a what do they call it? Prime tone version, and I've got the red and the gray Max Scripts, and I've had the Eric Johnson and the old regular nylon. And then Zach Childs from Ask Zach loves those D'Andrea medium heavies, so I ordered a dozen of those, and they don't work for me. I found I sound too flappy with them. They feel like a Fender medium to me. And things in this diameter, I do like these Dunlop flows though, the .88 mils. Very similar in a lot of ways. They just don't feel flappy. But I also have this bare knuckle, real thick tortoise that I really like the sound of for certain things. I also like the way these sound. Howls sound better than mine, though. I need to get a finger upgrade. I think Tim Lurch, should donate his fingers to science. Not immediately, Tim. When you're done with them. Vinicius, do I think the HX could replace all or almost all modulation stuff on a regular pedal board? For most people, yeah. For most people, there are things that won't do as well as certain pedals. It's not going to be a replacement for a really great Univibe. It's not going to be a replacement for a tri-stereo chorus for someone who really knows how to dial it in and is looking for very specific things. It doesn't replace, say, a 2290 for some modulated delays I love. But it does pretty good versions of all those things in one little thing. I'm just looking for something to have for the channel where most of the time first of all, number one, I want to be able to go through it and not hear it. So when it's off, it's off. And the pedals I built, I know that will do that. And this does that. And when I get the Polytune 3 with the buffer, it needs to sound as if it's doing that. But then for someone who wants to know how a pedal how an amp takes pedals, I can call up a couple overdrives and this, or I can do stuff for my own fun. And that's why I'm looking into all the other features of this. Like the reamping could be really nice to have for the channel, because this thing has got, which is what I've been using, the Ditto Plus, has got limitations, and I'd love to be able to move this on. And I bought this because I thought someone had stolen this, and I found it 6 months later in the back of an amp where it had fallen. So I've got two Dittos, but I'm not doing live loops. I don't need to have a whole bunch of looper pedals, but I do want to be able to reamp performances, like I mentioned. And I play bass, but I don't have a bass amp. And, I play tubes. So what if it's 2 o'clock in the morning? It's very nice to be able to put on the headphones and dial up spin the wheels and play Pink Floyd's Sorrow and sound like I'm playing into a Rat pedal into a GKML 250 with a Boss DD3. It does that. So as long as you don't expect this thing to do everything perfectly, if I can just get the noise under control, and I think so much of that might be the power supply. I have no rose tint to my glasses. I have scratch tints to my glasses. I need to get new glasses. Hey, Lion Circle, I'm the wrong person to ask. I just turn on a fan. I don't have an active exhaust system, so I may die at any moment, according to the internet. But, I grew up not using sunscreen. In fact, our suntan lotion was to accelerate that. So I've got lovely, lovely spots all over from being a true child of the 70s. So if I'm doomed, I'm pre-doomed. But you should probably look into getting a buffer or some other kind of exhaust system. Don't use me as your health model. Let's see. Hey, Scott Rogers, how hard would it be to DIY a splitter that's isolated, has a phase switch? Well, to do it right, you want to have a buffer before the split, and to do the buffer right, there's a lot of things. You don't just grab the buffer out of a Klon, because that would suck. And don't grab the buffer out of a Boss, because that typically sucks too. And then you want to have an isolation transformer to do the phase split, the polarity invert. And then you got to be specific about the transformer. And the transformers always have a certain amount of level drop, so we're going to offset that on that side, so the buffer may have a slight bit of gain to one side but not the other. A lot goes into this, and I've done it before. I've designed it in the past. I'll put it this way. I have done it well. I can design a truly transparent buffer with an isolation transformer and polarity and ground switching. For the pedal board I'm putting together, I don't have one that I used to make, and the one I used to make was in a different form factor. I'm going to order the one the Gig Rig makes, because they make one for like $175. Dan over at that pedal show, the Gig Rig has that already existing, and it costs me more to design and build one than just to buy what he already makes. So sometimes it's better to say, hey, that already exists. That wheel is right there. It's already around. I'll just buy one. But if you want to make one, then everything that I just said, you need to figure out why I said that and figure out how to make all that stuff work and really get into it. The one I used to build used analog devices op amp, and I used a 30-volt rail-to-rail supply derived from a 9-volt supply, which is tricky to get in a small form factor without any heat issues or any issues with the dreaded switching power supplies. Profile Productions, do I play out anymore? No, I haven't played out since the kids were little, because I used to play out all the time, and I'd come home at 4 in the morning having made my $40, and I'd smell like an ashtray and stale beer, and then I'd get up an hour and a half later to take the kids to daycare, and then I'd go to work, and I realized that if I kept doing that, I'd be a bad father, a failure as a human being, and I still wouldn't be a Beatle. Since then, I just play with friends, really. I still have the urge to get out there. It's weird how much of a rush I get when I do things in public. I get a little hit of it doing this twice a month, but I'm so rusty. I used to be a much better player than I am, and all the stuff I know how to play, copyright strikes. So I'm not going to sit here and do a full set of REM and Beatles and Cars for you, because I'd make no money and potentially get everything, get the channel struck. So I'm in a weird postmodern place with all that. I miss it, but I don't miss modern venues. All right, well, the Little King S, I was unfamiliar with, Michael. Sorry. So if Tim's still here, check that out. Headstrong makes good amps, but I don't think it's going to be any lighter than the Vibrolux he already has. That's mighty kind of you, Andy. You didn't have to do that. You already brought me 3 old Fenders, so I'll make my money off you. I'll make my money off you the hard way, but I do appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Hey, Captain Grumpus, why does the tremolo have that ticking noise on the Princeton reverb? Is it just in the design? It's not just the design, but there can be issues with the lead dress, and you can see one of the more recent Fender videos where I put a 10 nanofarad across the roach. That fixes that. Look at my most recent Fender videos. One of the last 5 shows that. For the people who play IUAP, great amp that will last. Well, I know more about amps that will last than most people who play out all the time. And I used to play out all the time, but I see more amps a month than most people see in a year. And I don't know what IUAP is. But what is a great amp that will last? Well, here's the thing. I could have the world's best Hot Rod Marshall and give it to Jim Hall. It doesn't matter if it lasts. It's useless. You got to find the right amp for the player. Oh, okay. You're talking about you're talking about the little black discs. Those are thermistors. They're just there to limit inrush current. I don't know why they're there. They're not necessary. You can even bypass them. But if they're working, you can leave them. They do no harm. They're just thermistors. They don't let any voltage pass, any current flow until they reach a certain temperature. So you get a slight ramp up of the incoming AC. For those of you who get offended when I say current flow, voltage flow, and all this, these are useful terms for most people. I know that the voltage doesn't actually move. We can go have a whole argument about that with our whiteboards and our virginity, but for most people, it's okay to say voltage flows as such. Well, Hal, thanks for the friendship and all the free lessons you've given me, unintentionally or notwithstanding. The thermistor limits the current for a brief period and then lets the current through as it warms up. So it's like ramping it up. A fuse doesn't limit the current until the current gets way too much. So the fuse sets a maximum. No more current than this is permitted, or I'll cut it off. The thermistor says, hey, let's bring in the current slowly up to the normal level. And then the fuse says, hey, it's getting towards above the normal level. Let's cut it off completely. So. Hey, Dan Morris of Old Dog Guitars. What is my opinion of hybrid tube amps? From what I can see, the tubes are kind of pointless, more of a marketing ploy than anything. That can be the case. I'm thinking of some of the Black Star stuff where it's 99% op amp, and then they'll have 2 tubes in there. And they approach marketing tubes. Not quite. But there are other things where the tubes are used quite well. It's like pedals. There have been guitar pedals with tubes in them. Mesa had one, and ART used to sell Mic Pre, the Tube MP. Those were all marketing tubes, run current starved, like 30 volts. Really sad. Just there to kind of glow and say, hey, we got a tube in us. Then there are pedal companies like Kingsley that's got like 300 volts in there for their tube circuits, which are really good. Meanwhile, there are things like the Matchless pedals where it's all tube and it's all crap. Very expensive crap, but so I don't think that you're wrong, but there's some babies in that bathwater, so you got to, not you, but all of us have to be careful drawing sweeping conclusions. Hybrid can be quite good. Hey, Mike Chandler, the JJ5881s are okay, but in an old 6G6B Bassman, my preference, if you can get them right now, would be either the Tungsol 6L6 GCSTRs or the Tube Store 6L6 GCSTRs, short bottle 6L6s. Sorry, Michael. Yeah, that's kind of my experience with things. There's only so much you can do without adding a lot of size and weight. And if you want a whole bunch more volume out of the amp, typically you're going to want more volume in the speaker cabinet as well. So the entire dimensions need to get bigger, because if you have a 12-inch speaker with 22 watts and a deluxe reverb, it's already a little bit boxy with not a ton of low end compared to the same speaker put in a 2x12 for a twin or for a reverb. And then you double the power or increase the power without increasing the acoustic properties of the cab. You're wasting power because that speaker isn't going to run very efficiently, and you're going to lose, a lot of the frequencies will just acoustically not be present no matter what you do. You've got to, if you want loud and clean and with headroom, you need physically larger cabinets, or you need to fully take the digital pill and get Axe Effects stuff and in-ears or whatever. Thank you, Dan Morris. I appreciate that. I've heard a few things about the ASMR and the radio stuff. I've always been told I have a face for radio. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Hello, Lyle and friends, says Rob F. He just finished his last choir of the day. I've been watching a show on Amazon called Endeavor. It's prequels to the Inspector Morse mysteries, and it's all set in Oxford in the 60s, and he's in a church choir and dealing with various very refined, very British killers. And we just finished my last choir of the day. Sounded like a very refined serial killer. Anyway, maybe you meant chore. Big difference. Hey, Guitars and Amps Rock, I appreciate that. I don't have interest or time to go through and repair your tube tester. Let's put it this way. I have 2 tube testers. They are both in the attic, unrepaired, because I have not had time to get to them. So if I don't have time to fix mine, I don't have time to fix yours. And I am so constantly swamped with amp work that tube tester repair is boring. It's like changing tires for a living. I just don't have any interest in it, even for my own needs. So there are a lot of really good techs out there who can fix your tube testers, especially since that gets into the world where electronics knowledge is enough. And again, I'm not trying to prop myself up. There are a lot of techs who are musical as well. But there is a division in this industry. There are amp techs who came into it because they were techs and they realized they could also make money fixing guitar amplifiers, musical instrument amplifiers, but they don't play, they're not musical, they have no interest in that, and they're just looking at the schematic and looking at voltage charts and looking what a scope says. And that says whether it's behaving within certain parameters and whether it's safe. And there are people, Dave Friedman, Brad's Guitar Garage. I know a lot of guys, Alan, who are musicians, who are also good at the technical, who can say, yeah, okay, it's working, it's safe. That's the starting point. Now let's make it musical. Let's make it really sing. And that's a difficult thing. But when it comes to repairing a tube tester, you don't need someone who has musical inclination. You need to get someone who likes sitting down and doing log calculations and scoping waveforms and calibrating things. Hey, Natas, I have had an OR15, but I don't recall much about it. In my mind, oranges have two major flaws. Three major flaws. Current production oranges. Number one, they use really cheap metal on their pots, and the pots have long knurled split shafts, and their knobs are set screw, which compress the long knurled split shafts, and then those break, and so you have to replace the pot. And some of the pots are dual gang, and you can only get them from Orange. Second of all, some of their models have holes in the chassis where filter caps, big radial filter caps, pop out of the chassis. I've had some caps go bad there because there's a hole in the chassis and people have spilled things there. Third of all, some Oranges have had some clear plastic boxes that their fuses are in, and some of the fuses have been impossible to get to without disassembling the board because they're behind other things, and you can't get to the place where the lid is for that box unless you open the board. That's not a scathing indictment of the amp, but whoever designed that has never had to do a repair backstage 10 minutes before you're supposed to go on. Hey Sebastian, in my videos it is often the case that switches are not rated for high voltage DC. In the regular stores, I haven't found such rated for high DC. Can I recommend some? No, as far as I know, there aren't very many switches rated for high DC. Switches are rated for AC. So this switch here, these two switches here, the modern replacement are Carling, and most of the ones that you would find in this form factor would be 6 amps. They're rated for 6 amps at 125 volts or 3 amps at 240 volts or 250 volts AC. They're rated for like 35 milliamps for high voltage DC. Nothing else. Now, fortunately, when we have a standby switch, we may have 450 volts present, DC, well above the rating of that switch, but the current at that part of the amp is very low. The issue is that every time you flip the switch, which has DC on it, every time there's a little surge in current. And every time there's a surge, there is briefly high voltage DC, and even more than is present in a steady state because it'll spike from its steady state when you switch it. And briefly, there's a lot of current. And over time, that wears that switch out, and eventually standby switches arc. So I've had to replace a lot more standby switches than I've had to replace power switches because the power switches have AC and the standby switches have DC. Now, if you look at Marshalls, well, it's over there now, but if you look at that Marshall that was on the channel yesterday, that white super bass, and you look at the standby switch implementation, and this is common to a lot of Marshalls, you'll see that it's a double pole single throw switch, and so both sides of the switch are used because they're switching the HT secondary for standby, not DC after the rectification. So they have high voltage AC present on the power switch, and which is high voltage, fairly low current, and then they have very high voltage, even lower current AC on the secondary. So that's why Marshall's standby implementation traditionally is better than most other companies, because they're switching the HT secondaries. It's why I've said if you have an amp like this, you don't ever need to use, specifically an old 60s Fender with a tube rectifier, you don't need to use a standby switch. It's not doing anything other than being an expensive, hard to reach mute switch. And for a mute switch, that's why I like to have a tuner on a board. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Rob, because, I'm not a big fan of choirs, but we shouldn't be mean to them. Let's see. Is there a difference in quality with UK-made Orange amps? I don't know today. I know the old Orange and Mad amps were very good, and the stuff that's made today is made to a price point. So, tweaking is out of my realm. I'm confused, Profile Productions. Is this the first video of mine you've watched? Typically, to comment here, you have to be a subscriber. Maybe you're a new subscriber, in which case, welcome. Thank you. I'm not being mean. But if you look through my maybe 1,000 videos at this point up on the channel, I'm constantly making tweaks and changes for players. A lot of mods. It's just that when I'm done with an amp, the mods don't tend to stand out. It doesn't look like a modded amp very often. You might see a wire or two here or there, but I do make changes. I do tweak for specific players and just as broad strokes. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, I've got about 1,000 videos waiting for you. But yeah, I tweak all the time because I want things to be different, or because individual players need something different. Is 66 still considered to be a good year for the AC30 6 top boost? Yeah, 66 is a great year. 68 is the last year before they started outsourcing a lot of the stuff to an Italian board maker. And 69, the company was sold. I believe that's right. So 68 and 69 are kind of the last years of the classic JMI amps. I like 65, 66, and 67 the most because you get integrated top boosts. You get the silver speakers, which I like, and you get the black diamond grill cloth, which I like. Electronically, you also are less likely to have an amp full of Erie and Hunt's caps. They had some, well, wait, let me get this right. The Erie resistors, the carbon comp Erie resistors, the big fat white ones, those things fail. And on some of the early 60s amps, they had some brown Wema film caps that kind of melted and turned to sludge. So if I could snap my fingers and have my ultimate 60s JMI, I don't much care about Woden versus Haddon. Either of those is great. I like the gold trophy foils. I like the later carbon film resistors that aren't prone to huge drifts. And I love the black diamond grill cloth. And I like the silver speakers even more than the blue. I'd settle for the blue if you twisted my arm. We're almost caught up to, hey, Brad's here, cool. We're almost caught up to the end. It's amazing. It's like 3 streams in a row. Maybe I've just scared other people off. Thoughts on putting a blonde basement into a combo cabinet? I can't think of any reason why not to, other than, it is convenient to have 2 lighter trips and 1 big one, but there's no reason you can't put a blonde basement head into a combo cabinet. I'm sure people have done that. Hey Sebastian, looking schematics, he's confused about tube naming. V1 to VX, is there a tradition rule to follow? Typically, V1 is the one closest to the input, and then it goes up from there. Now, some amps, I'm looking at you, Mesa. I'm looking real hard at you, PV 5150. Jump around because the tubes are numbered a certain way in the schematic, but their physical place in the amp has no correlation to that. Especially on the 5150, it's hard to keep track of which preamp tube does what when you're working on one. It's a little confusing on some Fenders in that they're named sequentially from one end to the next, but V1 and V2 are electronically equivalent as far as where they come in the circuit in relation to input jacks. Each one is related to its own pair of input jacks. But in general, and the Vox AC30, the JMI AC30, the tube numbers jump around a little bit. But there are people who do it based on where the sequence of the tubes appear in the schematic, and there are people who do it based on where the tubes appear physically in the amp. And once you recognize which one is which, it's pretty easy to figure out, okay, they're calling it this because this is where it appears in the schematic, even though if it's over here. The issue is when you get into things like Mesa and the 5150, where neither rule is in place. It's just random generation. So. Oh yeah, Dan. On the old Super Champ XD, X2, and the Marshall Hayes, those are garbage. Yeah. But there are good amps done that way. The Milkman stuff is done that way. It's possible to do it right, but yeah, the XD amps and the Hayes were pretty much crap. I'm sorry that they got you, man. Sorry that they got you. Well, Curtis, you bought I'm glad, first of all, I'm glad your match quad from TAD about 3 years ago has been going great. That's fantastic. I'm going to install them soon. Well, you got me there. But yeah, 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, the tube supply was much better than it is now. So it is what it is, and we're all dealing with the fallout. Any coaching on replacing an AC30 CC2X grill cloth? Yeah, take it to a fabric shop. Take it to an upholstery shop. They're going to be real good at that. I've done it once or twice. I won't do it again. The main issue with the Voxes is that gold fascia strip is glued into a channel, and behind that channel, one piece of Tolex is glued down, and then the grill cloth is glued down. It's really tricky to get that to go in there and stay in there and be taut. And I don't want to try it again because I am not Martha Stewart, and I don't have any helpers, and I don't have any fabric stretching frames. But if you were to take that to an upholstery shop and explain to them what's going on and what your concerns are, that'll be close enough to what they usually do with lazy boys and couches and stuff that they can probably take care of you pretty easy. But bring them the baffle and the cloth and explain that how it all works. They can probably do it for you much easier than you can do it yourself. If you can do it yourself, maybe you have a future in upholstery repair. I do not. Contamingo, it's the RAF Connery Bond, but it's not the Murph today. It's the khaki fueled 38. Thanks, man. Low key flex. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. It's nice to have the subtle things noticed. Hey, Josh F., I appreciate that. Send me an email, info@sonicaudio.com, and I will try to get through them. It is really hard to keep up with all the emails, both because of the popularity of the channel, for which I'm very grateful, and because of the popularity of the channel, I have so much spam and so many companies who want me to sell you guys things. I have apparently I'm at the tipping point where every AliExpress fly-by-night company making some crappy product wants me to partner with me so I can sell it to you guys. And I don't want to do that. That's zero interest in selling you guys anything, let alone crap. But the trouble is, occasionally there'll be things like I got an email from 5 Watt World, Keith Williams, the other day. What if I got an email from some other channel? I have to keep those lines open, which means I've got to go through and sort through everything. And at the same time, my plate is full. Like that white Marshall yesterday, it came in a month ago. I'm just now got to it because I have a lot more amps here than you see on the channel, a lot more amps in progress than you see on the channel. So I'm trying to reply to emails. I'm also being selective in what I take in. I'll tell you now, I don't ever want to work on a Blues Junior again if I can help it. I've got one coming up to finish. Belongs to a client in town whose amps I've worked on, and this is a favorite thing. But and people will start to complain, more old '60s Fenders and Marshalls and Voxes and stuff. And it won't all be old '60s Fenders and old Marshalls and old Voxes. There'll be old Gibsons. There'll be high watts. There'll be lots of stuff. Maybe some of those old Mark Bartel era Tone Kings will be coming up. But I don't want to work on a Hot Rod Deluxe ever again. And I've worked really hard to get in a position where I might not have to. So. Yeah. Well, so that's the thing. I'm friends with the guys at Tube Depot, and they're 20 minutes from here. So they're real good at that. They've got a maxi matcher that my friend Rob Hull set up for them back when he was working there. He's at FedEx now, making more money. Good for him. But he used to be at Tube Depot. He was the me at Tube Depot, and he set up their whole testing scheme, and it works really well. So I just have them do it for me, and it's very nice. Well, Josh F., I don't mean to be mean. I have no interest in working on another JCM 2000. It's a lot of work to end up with an amp that I find has a lot of compromises. The Victory I might be interested in because don't get a lot of Victories in the States. But there's so many guys who'd be glad to take on the JCM 2000. That's a period of Marshall where I think they're beginning to lose the plot. What's the best way to put this? I'm often accused of being really negative in my videos about amps. So the better the amps that come in, the more selective I can be about what I work on, the less negative I have to be. Because most JCM 2000s are just an insult to you, the buyer, an insult to you, the musician. Got a guy yesterday telling me what kind of idiot I am because I pointed out that the TSL 100 likes to catch on fire. Because they do. Because every tech who's ever done this for a while learns that. But I'm wrong because he's never had any problem with his amp. And so, there are certain amps, and I'm not saying you're one of them, Josh. There are certain amps that attract a certain cult-like following, and I have enough windmills to tilt already. Hey, New York City Geology. I had a Atma 18N. It was terrible. I don't remember all all specific ways it was terrible, but it was terrible. You want a low wattage Marshall thing. What's low wattage to you? Typically, I'd send people to the 15 watt Friedmans or some of the Sir stuff, like the Badger. I think he's got a Badger 15. I know he's got a Pete Thorne 15. That's a different price point, but I don't know what low wattage is for you. I'll look for your email, Josh. I think I could probably do some real good for you for the Kraken, the JCM 2000 with shipping and all. I think shipping and repair on JCM 2000 would exceed its proper value. Cool, Seth. He's got a blood and broken glass covered silver jubilee. That's really nice, and it really was going to pull the room together. My wife is actually friends with the ex lead singer of Guar. I don't remember the girl's name. I've not met her, but when she comes to town, they go to coffee together, and it's really funny. If you knew my wife, she is the opposite of what you'd expect from someone who knows the ex lead singer of Guar. But from what I've heard, being a lead singer for Guar was one aspect of this girl's theater dream. So I don't know her name or what her character name in Guar was. I saw Guar once in '89 in Atlanta. I stayed about 10 minutes. It was not for me. Lion Circle, you should send it to Lazy J. I'm pretty sure you're fucking with us, but yeah, Lazy J's and Little Walters make Morgan look like Leo. So it's amazing what people will buy these days. Sucker born every minute. No one ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the American public, whatever. Yeah, et cetera, and all those other isms. I think we're coming up towards the end. Let me try to wrap this up. But Josh, yeah, I'll look for your email, and I'd be glad to take a look at your victory for you. Hey, Terrence Smith, the Cerebella is fantastic. I think you'd love the Cerebella if you want a clean that still has some personality. Yeah, a big fan of that. Tommy Williams of the Hooters. Hey, Tommy. I've really enjoyed some of those albums. And right now I've got And We Dance stuck in my head. I don't know why that came there. That's not my favorite song of yours, but thank you for joining us. Do I still do the AC30 rebuild package on the website with power scaling? I prefer the modern C over the 90s AC36 or the custom classic. The TBX, the 90s AC30C had so many problems with the ground loops built in and a lot of things that go wrong and increasingly failing power transformers. And the CC was good for when it was made, but the custom series sounds better. I do still rebuild, but the web prices are way out of date, and I don't do power scaling very often anymore because I had some thermal issues with it, and I prefer a good master volume. If shoot me an email at info@sonicaudio.com, and I'll look for it. I'd be glad to make something work for you, and I can make the old Korg 90s AC36 TBXs work really well. It's just a lot more labor involved. At the end of all that labor, you get something that's identical pretty much to a JMI as far as all three channels. But for most players, I think the AC30 Custom C2X with some judicious mods gets them 95% of the way for a fraction of the price. Hey, there, Ghost. I don't know where you are. 64 Vibrolux Reverb that's been sitting since '78. Yeah, should not be plugged in. Where are you? If you're Ohio. Oh, we know some good people in Ohio. Brad, put him in touch with K. I got KLF stuck in my head. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's not who we know in Ohio, but Brad, I'm talking about the guy who's friends with Jason. He'll take it on, or he'll know someone good in Ohio to take that on. I don't have access to all my people list right now, but Brad can help you out there. hopefully, if he's paying attention. There you go. Brad will know who I'm talking about. I don't know how I got the KLF stuck in my head. Hey, Raphael. Yeah, in the videos where you see the Royer, it's a Royer R10 hot rod, which is the regular R10, but it has the capsule from the R121 and a different transformer. I like the looks of the regular R10 better, but I like the sound of this better. I used to have an R121. Someone stole it. I know who did it, but I can't prove it. Anyway, yeah, the R10, sometimes I will, oftentimes, if someone's coming over to play, I will put the 57 and the R10 up, and I'll position them in such a way to get more of the lows with the R10. And I'm careful about getting them aligned as far as the phase and time alignment. And I even test record and go to the waveform view and make sure that everything's lining up without doing any nudging in the computer. I want what the mics hear to be exactly time aligned. But the last week or so, everything you've heard, I've just had the R10 by itself, and I've just positioned it a little bit closer to the edge of the cone. It sounds really good by itself. I'm really pleased with it. To me, it is the closest I've ever found to a one-and-done microphone when you're not in a fantastic space. If this room sounded fantastic, and I had a U67 here about 6 feet back from the amp, about 5 feet from the floor, that'd be a perfect one-and-done. But you'd hear how bad this room actually sounds. So I've got that Royer 3 of my fingers, so about 3 inches away from the grill cloth. That's kind of like the compromise. Gets a little bit of the room, so it doesn't feel dead, but it's primarily just what's coming out of the speaker. Yeah, Kyle at KSR. That's why I went with KLF. Thanks, Brad. KSR. Find KSR amps. Like Ghost. He's somewhere in Ohio, and they do this. And he's got to know every good tech in Ohio. Tell him that Brad and I sent you, even if it's just for him to recommend someone great in your area. I know someone in far eastern Ohio, almost to Pittsburgh, I believe, but I can't remember their name right now. I apologize. I don't know what I had for breakfast, mostly because I didn't have breakfast. So speaking of which, I think it's about time to wrap this up. Yeah, Rob Chafe is near there. He's great. Is it Chafe or Chaffee? I've never known because I've never heard it, just read it. But he's another great one to look up. If I don't know whether David Allen is still doing service, but if he is, he'd be great. But yeah, Rob Chaffee or Mad Cow Amplification would be another great contact for you there, Lee Ghost, because that amp, I think you said it was a Vibrolux, is well worth having repaired. But if it's been sitting for 30 years untouched, 40 years untouched, have him touch it. Get in touch with Kyle, get in touch with Rob, get in touch with David. One of them, let them touch it. They'll touch the hell out of it. The good touch. On that slightly disturbing note, it is time for us to wrap this up. Hope you all have a good weekend. John Gary, and thank you for joining me. Look for a video Monday morning on this 66 Tremolux, and I'm going to be getting some other stuff together for you guys. But that white Marshall video that Super Bass is doing so well, I'm just going to let it run without any competition this weekend and see if that works for the algorithm. I never know these things. See you guys. Yeah, please give us a like if you don't mind. It buys the coffee.